Hi everybody, thanks for coming along today. Today's webinar is called Entwine Interpreting Your Benchmarking Report. So really the main audience for this webinar is Entwine members who've just received their benchmarking reports and need some help going through them. So my name's Mardi Longbottom, I'm a senior viticulturist at the AWRI. If you'd like to contact me, you can contact me via the help desk or otherwise call the AWRI. I'll provide some more details at the end of the webinar. At the end of the webinar there'll be a Q&A session. There's two different ways you can ask questions. You can ask a question using the question box at the bottom right hand side of your screen, or otherwise you can unmute your microphone and ask by raising your hand at the end of the webinar. So as I said, we're going to talk today about interpreting your benchmarking reports. If you wanted to contact me directly, that's my email address and number. So the first thing you need to do is log on to Entwine Online. Now if you've forgotten the address or don't know where to find it, it's there at the bottom of the page. It's as simple as putting your Entwine number in here and your password. Now if you've forgotten your password, it's very easy to reset it. Just click on the Forgotten Password button. Now once you have logged in successfully, you'll see a page that looks like this. And what you want to do is click on this link here that says View Your Report 2016. So those reports are available now. Now, just a bit of a tip along the way, if at all you want to go back to the AWRI website, back to the Entwine page, you just need to click on this, and that will take you straight back there, so that's a live link. And if you wanted to go to the AWRI website, you click up there, it takes you back to the AWRI homepage. So there's a whole lot of resources there in case you need them. Now, if we're looking at the results pages, the first thing you need to do is make sure you've gone along all of these tabs here and you want to end up on the results tab. Now once you're in the results tab, make sure you're looking at the right reporting year. If you're not in the right year, you can go back to the data tab and there's a drop down box where you can change the year. But what we're looking at today is the 2015-16 results. So starting first with production metrics and emissions. What this page here is really just a report of all the data that you've already reported into us for your business. So this is just a summary of your data. Now if you go down the page, that data has been converted into greenhouse gas emissions, and you can see here that the units being used are kilograms of carbon equivalents. So that is, it's your data, and we've converted all of that into carbon equivalents. Now down the bottom of the page you can see there's a year-by-year comparison of your greenhouse gas emissions. So this is the current year that you've reported and this is the previous year. And this graph over here is the breakdown of your greenhouse gas emissions into fuel use, fertiliser and electricity. So this graph here is just a different representation of what you can see here. Now the other thing to note on this page is that there's this button here that says Save Excel Data. If you click on that one, it will actually export all of your data into an Excel spreadsheet. So this is a good way to keep the records for yourself, or if you want to manipulate them in any other way, it's a pretty handy little tool for you to use. So just remember that that's there and you can use that. And you can go back also and do previous years. So that was the production metrics and emissions. If we move over here to summary metrics to just explain how to interpret this page here, the first column that you've got there, that's the AWRI test site, but if this was your business and you were logged in, you'd see your business name there. So down this column is all of the data that you've entered this year. So for yield, yield in tonnes per hectare, that's your data, okay? And so on down that column. Now moving across is the region that you're in. So for this example site, the region is the Adelaide Hills. You've got the zone, so for this particular example it's Mount Lofty Ranges, there's the state, it's in South Australia, and you've also got the national. So these are averages, so if you wanted to compare your site at the regional, zonal, state or national level, you can do that because these are the averages at each of those levels. So just to show you how this works, if you were just looking at your yield, so your yield in tonnes per hectare is 9.38 tonnes per hectare, and you can compare that to the Adelaide Hills average for 2015-16 was 10.94, so your site is below the average for the region. For the zone of Mount Lofty Ranges, again it's closer to yours, but you're slightly below the average for Mount Lofty Ranges, and so on for the state and national. if we just go down and have a look at diesel use, so this first one is diesel used per unit harvested, so that is litres of diesel per tonne harvested, and this is your data here, 6.76 litres per tonne, and comparing that to the average for the Adelaide Hills, you're well below the Adelaide Hills average. So the diesel that you've used per tonne of fruit harvested is very low, and looking across at the average for the zone, a similar story. For South Australia, again, it's slightly lower than for the hills and Mount Lofty ranges, but your value is much lower than that average and significantly lower than the national average. And a similar one, diesel used per hectare, that's a much larger number, but your value is 63.46 litres per hectare, and again, comparing that to the Adelaide Hills average, it's significantly lower than that. So this is just to show you how to interpret this data here. Now, if you go to the benchmarking page, so that's the middle tab there on the second row down, this is a little bit different. So this is where you're really comparing your data against either previous years or other sites. So you notice that there's a drop-down menu here. The first one that you need to look at, you can choose whether you compare yourself to other years or compare yourself to other sites. Now the first example I've chosen, compare with other years, and then the next drop down you have to choose whether you're going to look at your totals or per tonne of grapes or per hectare of vineyard. And so if you're a winery member looking at this, it'll be per tonne of grapes crushed or per kilolitre of wine finished. So the kind of results or the kind of report that you'd see here is broken up into two sections as well. It's production metrics, and a little bit further down the page, I'll show you in a second, is greenhouse gas emissions. So what this really does is just compares, for this one it's totals, so your totals tonne harvested compared with last year and this year, just so that you can see how you're tracking from year to year. So in this particular example, last year they had a significant area of biodiversity. Something's happened this year, and that biodiversity area no longer exists. But one of the other good pieces of information, especially in this example, is I thought we'd look at total electricity. You can see here that for this particular example, total electricity is almost exactly the same between 14-15 and 15-16. But the difference you can see is that for generated electricity, there was nothing last year, but this year there's been a significant amount of electricity generated, and this is because there was a solar panel installation put in for the, to support the vineyard. Now, even though there is a lot of solar power generated here, the total electricity is actually unchanged, mainly because this is the sum of the electricity that you've taken from the grid and also the electricity that you've generated. Okay, so that's really important that you remember that. It's different when we get to greenhouse gas emissions though. So looking at greenhouse gas emissions now, so this is down the bottom of that report. If we look at electricity, so now we're not talking about total electricity, we're talking about the greenhouse gas emissions related to the electricity that you have used. And you can see here that that difference, because you've generated some solar electricity, is that the emissions that you've generated is much lower this year compared to last year. And the impact that that's had on the on-site total greenhouse gas emissions, so remembering that the on-site total is the sum of fuel, fertiliser and electricity, that's gone down a little bit. So your fuel use hasn't changed, fertiliser use has changed just marginally, but there is a fair difference there in your on-site total, and that's mostly related here to your emissions from electricity. Okay. Now, the other thing you can look at in benchmarking, so we've looked at comparison with other years, is comparison with other sites. Now, this is where the system actually compares you to every other member that we have in our database. Now, in here, there's a number of different filters that you can choose from. If you've chosen to compare with other sites, you can choose one of these and you can change them and come up with lots of different variations of reports. So the first thing is you choose whether you're going to compare your totals or per hectare of vineyard, per tonne of grapes. Now that's either harvested for vineyards, or for wineries it's per tonne of grapes crushed. And then for wineries again it's per kilolitre of finished wine. So you just choose whichever one of those you want to look at. And then you can compare yourself against all of the members across Australia, or you can compare yourself to just those in your region, those in your state, those in your zone, Or the new one, and this is only available for vineyards though, is you can compare others in the same climatic zone as yours. And when you choose, if you do choose that one there, there's actually a link that you can click on that gives you an outline of which regions are in each of those climate zones. And then the last filter that you can choose from is that you compare yourself to all sizes, so that's vineyard or winery, or just those vineyards or wineries in the size category that you're in. So this is probably more meaningful for a lot of people because there's obviously big differences in efficiency between small vineyards and wineries compared to large vineyards and wineries. And then finally, once you've chosen your filters, click on this display benchmark results. Now it's really important, because this is a calculation of a very large database, it does take a few seconds. So the way to know whether or not this is working, if it is calculating, you'll see this message here that says calculating. Don't be tempted to keep clicking this or it will just make it restart. Okay, so just be patient with it. It can take up to 30 seconds depending on the filters that you've used. So once the benchmarking report is finished, you can see here these are the filters that I chose. I compared with other sites, per hectare of vineyard, I compared against all of Australia and all size vineyards. So the first thing you can see here is that the number of sites that you're being compared to, the total is 438. And like I said before, it's divided into production metrics. So this is the production metrics part of the report. And then there's also a greenhouse gas emissions part of the report. Now, it's pretty important to understand how to read these reports. So for each metric that you've got there, you get one of these dials. Now, the number down the bottom is a percentage, and it's actually your ranking compared with other sites. So for this example here, you've got total greenhouse gas emissions per tonne, and your ranking is 19%. And you can see that in the bottom 25% it's green, and the top 25% it's red. So this is just an arbitrary number where the closer you are to the green, the better your performance is. But if you're up at the red, it means that there's room for improvement. So 19%, what that means is that if, for example, in the group that you filtered you wanted to be compared against, so for example, if this was your region and there were 61 members in your region that you were comparing yourself against, and your score is 19%. So you need to work out, where do I sit if I'm ranked at 19%? Well, 19% is here. So this is your ranking. So this is an example of where you would be sitting against everyone else in the region. So you're at the lower end, in the lowest 19%. Now, in contrast to that, if we have a look at this score here, which is 67%, so they're in the higher group in that comparison. So 67% is here, so it's around about 70%. This is your ranking here. So you're up in the top 33% of all of the people in that group. Okay, so just remember that this is a ranking. It's not your actual number in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. It's your ranking as a percent. So let's have a look at this production metrics report. For this particular example, the most interesting thing I thought we could have a look at was the total electricity. But just while we're here, the water use, so this is kilolitres per hectare, this person is performing quite well. They're in the lowest third of all the members. So remembering the filters I chose were per hectare and everyone in Australia and all vineyard sizes. So this business is performing in the lowest third in terms of their water use per hectare. Now, nitrogen use is relatively high, so they're in the top 33% of everyone in terms of their kilos of nitrogen per hectare. And diesel here is quite good as well, so they're quite low in the bottom 18%. Now, if we look at electricity, remembering what I told you before about the installation of the solar panels in the vineyard, the total electricity, the best way to interpret this is that, so remembering it's combined grid and generated electricity. This one here is actually a measure of efficiency. So it's using the total amount of electricity that you've got and how efficiently you've used it per hectare. The reason this is important is because we've actually assumed that all of the electricity that you've generated, you've actually also used. Now, if you're in the position where you're generating electricity and you're exporting to the grid, you need to actually let us know about that. Now, the other part of it is that the generated electricity, so that you can see that this business is performing really well because they're in the top 7%, and that is because they're generating quite a bit of electricity per hectare. Now if we look at the greenhouse gas emissions, you can see here that so this is the report for this year, and remembering that the on-site total greenhouse gas emissions per hectare, this is the sum of fuel, fertiliser and electricity. So it's the sum of these three lots of emissions here. So they're performing pretty well. They're in the bottom 26%, so in the bottom quartile if you like. Now what's contributing to this relatively low score is that the fuel use is relatively low as well, approximately in the bottom third. Fertiliser use is kind of high, and then when you look at the electricity though, so remember these are emissions from electricity, so the electricity from the grid, you can say that's actually the total electricity emissions has been lowered because some of that electricity was actually solar generated, so there's no emissions associated with that. Now I think most interesting is that if we have a look at the report from the previous year, you can see the big differences are here. So by the installation of the solar panels in this particular example, you can see that they've shifted their on-site total greenhouse gas emissions. They were ranked 46%, so around about the middle in across Australia last year, whereas now they've improved to the best quarter of all of the members. There's been a little bit of movement in fuel use. Fertiliser use has actually gone up a little bit, and this is not necessarily because this person has changed their practice, but maybe some of the others that they're being compared about have changed their practices. So if they've used less fertiliser per hectare, this would mean this person actually goes up in the rankings. But pretty significant here, you can see the change in emissions from electricity has changed. This person was ranked at 57% last year, and now they've gone down to 37%. Okay, so this is the way you should be using these benchmark reports to see how you perform against your peers last year and how you're performing this year, and trying to relate that back to any changes in practice that you've made. Now just remembering all throughout the benchmarking reports and all of the reports is that there's these little red question marks. Now if you hover over those, some tips and tricks appear there. So for example, in the greenhouse gas emissions, there's information for each of these ones about how you might consider changing your fuel use per hectare. We've actually been generating quite a few examples of the way people have used their benchmark reports to improve their practices. And if you go and have a look at the AWRI Entwine webpage, there's some example case studies down the bottom there. These link straight through to those, and just in the next couple of weeks there'll be a few more appearing there. And there's a whole lot of other information there if you wanted to have a look at it. So just remembering that's been a really quick snapshot of the benchmark reports. If you want any other information, there are quite a few of us there who can answer the phone. Just call through to the help desk or email us, or there's also a lot of information online, so feel free to do that. So that was all I had to talk to you about today. I don't see any questions there at the moment. If you're watching this later on, feel free to, again, email us through any questions that you have. We're there to help you. Okay, seems like there's no questions. Thanks a lot.